When 12-year-old Zora enters the Grand Museum with her sketchbook, the head of security immediately singles her out, accusing her of trespassing and theft, while white children roam freely, unaware he's confronting the lead curator's daughter. Zora Williams sat cross-legged on the polished marble bench, her sketchbook balanced on her knees as her pencil moved with quick, confident strokes. The 12-year-old's dark eyes narrowed with concentration as she captured the intricate details of the West African mask displayed before her. The geometric patterns etched into the wooden surface, the delicate beadwork that adorned its edges. The Metropolitan Cultural Museum stretched around her in grand, echoing halls. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting golden rectangles across the marble floors. Zora had been coming here every Tuesday and Thursday after school for the past month, waiting for her mother to finish her shift in the museum's administrative offices. "Wood from the cola tree," Zora murmured to herself, jotting notes beside her sketch. "Used in coming-of-age ceremonies, circa 1890. She smiled with satisfaction, comparing her drawing to the real artifact. The mask seemed to smile back at her from behind the glass. In these quiet afternoon hours, Zora felt like the museum belonged to her. She'd wander from exhibit to exhibit, traveling through time and across continents. Sometimes she'd sit for an hour in the Egyptian wing, imagining herself as a scribe beside the Nile. Other days, she'd lose herself among Mayan pottery or Renaissance paintings. But the African exhibits always drew her back, pieces of her own heritage preserved behind glass, telling stories she felt in her bones. Gerald Thornton, head of security, watched from across the gallery. His gaze followed Zora as she turned a page in her sketchbook, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Despite her school uniform and the visitor's badge clipped to her blazer, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Several other children, most of them white, were scattered throughout the same gallery with their parents or in school groups, but Thornton's attention remained fixed on Zora. When she stood to move closer to the display case, Thornton straightened his tie and approached with measured steps. "Excuse me, young lady," he said, his voice clipped. "What are you doing here by yourself?" Zora looked up, startled. "I'm sketching the artifacts, sir." She held up her notebook as evidence. "For my art project." Thornton glanced at her drawings without interest. "Where are your parents? We don't allow loitering in the galleries." "I'm not loitering," Zora replied, her voice steady despite the flush creeping into her cheeks. "My mom works in administration. I wait here after school on Tuesdays and—" "Right," Thornton cut her off, clearly unconvinced. He glanced toward a group of white children about Zora's age who were chatting loudly by a display of Egyptian jewelry. They received no such scrutiny. "I think you need to come with me," he decided, reaching for her elbow. "This area isn't for unaccompanied minors." "But my mother works here," Zora protested, clutching her sketchbook to her chest as Thornton began steering her toward the exit. "Her name is Diane Williams. You can call her office. Please." Thornton's grip remained firm. "We'll sort this out at the front desk," he said, his tone making it clear he'd already decided she didn't belong. "I really need to call my mom," Zora said, trying to keep her voice steady as Thornton's grip on her elbow tightened. The security guard steered her past the Egyptian artifacts she'd sketched just yesterday. "We'll call your guardian from the front desk," Thornton replied, emphasizing the word guardian with thinly veiled skepticism. "Once we've sorted this out." Zora's mind raced. Should she pull away? Yell for help? Her mother's words echoed in her head. "Always stay calm, Zora. Getting emotional will only make them label you as aggressive." "Sir, my mother is Dr. Williams, Dr. Amara Williams. She's the lead curator for the African Cultural Heritage exhibit." Zora spoke clearly, trying to inject her voice with confidence despite the tremor she felt building inside. Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly, his pace unfaltering. "Sure she is, and I'm the museum director." His sarcasm cut through her like a knife. The moment felt painfully familiar, like when the teacher at her previous school had accused her of cheating because her essay was too well written, or when the security guard at the boutique had followed her around the store while ignoring her white friends. Her mother called these those moments, moments when the world reminded them they were seen differently. "My phone's in my backpack," Zora said, reaching for the front pocket. "I can call her right now." Thornton's hand shot out, blocking her movement. "Let's not reach for anything suddenly," he warned, his tone hardening. "For all I know, that phone's probably stolen." The accusation hung in the air between them. Several nearby visitors turned to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. An elderly white couple whispered to each other, their eyes never leaving Zora. A middle-aged woman with 2 young children pulled them closer as they passed, as though Zora were contagious. Others simply looked away, suddenly fascinated by the exhibit descriptions they'd been ignoring moments before. Zora felt herself shrinking under their gazes as Thornton marched her across the grand hall's gleaming floor, her reflection fractured in the polished marble beneath her feet. By the time they reached the rotunda, Zora's embarrassment had transformed into a hard knot in her stomach. Thornton paused at the security desk, still gripping her arm. "Got a situation?" "Here, Marco," he said to the guard behind the desk. "Unaccompanied minor, possible trespasser." He tapped his radio. "Davis, I need backup at the main entrance." "Trespasser?" Zora's voice cracked. "I have a visitor badge." She pointed to the plastic card clipped to her uniform blazer. Thornton shrugged. "Those are easy enough to keep from a previous visit, or borrow from someone else." The implication stung, that she was a thief. A liar. Dangerous. Zora closed her eyes briefly, recalling her mother's guidance on these situations. Breathe deeply. Remember who you are. Their perceptions don't define your worth. "Is everything all right here?" A woman with silver-streaked black hair and wire-rimmed glasses approached, her concerned gaze moving between Zora and Thornton. "Museum security matters, ma'am," Thornton replied curtly. "Nothing to concern yourself with." "She seems upset," the woman persisted. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Before Zora could respond, Thornton stepped between them. "Ma'am, please move along. We're handling a security situation." The woman hesitated, then reluctantly backed away, casting one last worried glance at Zora. A second security guard, younger with a military-style haircut, arrived, positioning himself on Zora's other side. She felt cornered now, trapped between the 2 men. "I'm not causing any trouble," Zora said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I was just drawing." "You can't be in the museum without proper supervision," Thornton stated firmly. "It's a policy." "But there were other kids," Zora began. "They were with school groups or parents," Thornton cut her off. "Were they, though?" Zora wanted to ask. She'd seen at least 2 white teenagers wandering alone through the Renaissance wing. No one had questioned them. As they pushed through the heavy bronze doors to the outside, Zora felt a hot tear escape despite her determination to remain composed. She quickly wiped it away, refusing to let them see her cry. "Don't come back without proper supervision," Thornton warned as the doors swung closed behind her. "We'll be watching for you." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the museum's wide stone steps. Zora sank down on the third step from the bottom, her sketchbook clutched against her chest like armor. Only now, away from scrutinizing eyes, did she allow her tears to fall freely. Her fingers trembled as she dug her phone from her backpack and dialed her mother. No answer. Of course not. Dr. Williams was presenting the new exhibition plans to the board today. Zora left a voicemail, struggling to keep her voice from breaking. "Mom, they kicked me out. That security guard wouldn't believe me when I said, 'You work here. Can you come get me? I'm outside on the steps.'" Museum visitors streamed past her, most oblivious to her distress. A woman in a floral dress glanced at her with what looked like pity before hurrying up the steps. A tour guide led a group of tourists past her, his cheerful banter about the museum's architectural significance a stark contrast to Zora's misery. She opened her sketchbook, flipping through pages filled with careful drawings and detailed notes. The Egyptian scarab beetle she'd spent hours getting just right. The intricate patterns of the Ghanaian kente cloth she'd colored using the special pencils her mother had given her for her birthday. Was she fooling herself? Did she really belong in places like this, among these precious artifacts and masterpieces? Or would she always be seen as an intruder, someone to be watched, suspected, removed? Her phone vibrated. A text from her mother. In a meeting. Everything okay? Zora's thumbs hovered over the screen. She didn't want to worry her mother, and didn't want to pull her from an important presentation. But the tears came faster now, blurring her vision as she typed. "Security kicked me out. Said I didn't belong here." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then her phone rang. "Zora!" Her mother's voice was sharp with concern. "What happened? Where are you?" "Outside on the steps," Zora managed, her voice small. "The head security guard, Mr. Thornton, said I was loitering and wouldn't believe you work here. He said my phone was probably stolen and made me leave." Moment of silence followed, then the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping back. "I'm coming right now," Dr. Williams said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Stay exactly where you are." Zora could picture her mother, Dr. Amara Williams, with her braided updo and impeccable suits, the woman whose doctoral dissertation on West African cultural artifacts had revolutionized the museum's approach to its African collection, excusing herself from the boardroom full of trustees and executives. "Mom, your presentation is not more important than you. Ever." Her mother's voice softened slightly. "I'll be there in 2 minutes, baby. I promise." As Zora waited, she traced her fingers over her drawing of the African mask, the very one her mother had helped bring to the museum last year. Whatever Thornton or anyone else thought, these pieces were part of her heritage, her story. Dr. Amara Williams ascended the museum steps with measured strides, her tailored navy suit and leather portfolio marking her as someone who belonged in the halls of power. Several visitors stepped aside instinctively, responding to the quiet authority she projected. Her chin was lifted, eyes forward, but the tight line of her mouth betrayed her controlled fury. "Mom!" Zora called out, jumping to her feet. Dr. Williams's expression softened instantly as she opened her arms. Zora flew into her embrace, burying her face against her mother's shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of jasmine and sandalwood. "I'm sorry about your meeting," Zora whispered. Dr. Williams pulled back, cupping her daughter's face. "Never apologize for standing up for yourself," she said firmly. She brushed away a tear from Zora's cheek with her thumb. "Now let's go inside and address this situation." As they entered through the grand bronze doors, the security guard at the front desk, Marco, according to his nameplate, did a double take. "Doctor?" Williams! I didn't realize— His eyes darted nervously between mother and daughter. "Where is Mr. Thornton?" Dr. Williams asked, her voice level but steely. "I'll call him right away," Marco fumbled with his radio. "Mr. Thornton to the main entrance, please. Mr. Thornton to the main entrance immediately." Museum visitors slowed their pace, sensing the tension in the air. A small crowd began to gather at a respectful distance. "Dr. Williams, is everything all right?" A young tour guide approached, concern evident on her face. "No, Sophia. Everything is not all right," Dr. Williams replied. "My daughter was just forcibly removed from this museum under the assumption she didn't belong here." Whispers rippled through the growing audience. Zora stood taller beside her mother, drawing strength from her presence. Footsteps echoed across the marble floor as Gerald Thornton rounded the corner, his confident stride faltering as he spotted Dr. Williams. Recognition, and then alarm, flashed across his face. "Dr. Williams," he managed, his voice suddenly higher than before. "I wasn't aware. That young girl you accused of trespassing and theft is my daughter?" Dr. Williams finished for him. "Clearly." Thornton's face paled. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." "Was there a misunderstanding when you refused to call my office to verify her statement?" Dr. Williams asked. "Or when you suggested her phone was stolen, or perhaps when you marched her through this museum like a criminal while other children were permitted to wander freely?" "We have protocols for unaccompanied minors," Thornton began, his explanation sounding hollow even to his own ears. "She didn't have proper identification." "She was wearing her visitor badge," Dr. Williams countered, gesturing to the ID still clipped to Zora's blazer. "And my daughter has been coming here after school for weeks while I finish my work. The security team at the staff entrance knows her well." By now, several staff members had gathered nearby, including 2 board members who had been in the presentation. Dr. Williams had left. "Amara, what's happening?" asked an older woman with a statement necklace and severe gray bob, Ms. Farrington, the board chairperson. Dr. Williams turned slightly to address her without fully turning her back on Thornton. "My daughter was racially profiled by the head of security and removed from the premises despite informing him that I work here," Thornton sputtered. "That's not— I would never— I am Dr. Amara Williams," she continued, her voice carrying through the now silent rotunda. "Lead curator of African cultural heritage at this institution for the past 8 years. My daughter has every right to be in this space, not because of my position, but because this is a public museum that belongs to everyone." The museum director, James Harrington, pushed through the crowd, his bow tie slightly askew as if he'd rushed down from his top-floor office. "Amara, I'm deeply sorry about this incident," he said with genuine distress in his voice. "Mr. Thornton, my office, immediately. Ms. Farrington, shall we move this discussion somewhere more private?" "No," Dr. Williams said firmly. "There's nothing private about how my daughter was treated. She was publicly humiliated, and I won't have this conversation behind closed doors, as if we have something to hide." Zora watched her mother with growing admiration. How many times had they talked about this at home? "Sometimes you have to make people uncomfortable with the truth," her mother always said. "Injustice thrives in silence." "Of course, the museum extends its deepest apologies," Ms. Farrington began, glancing nervously at the gathering crowd of visitors and staff. "Apologies are insufficient," Dr. Williams replied. "I've spent years bringing diverse voices and perspectives to this institution. I've curated exhibitions that tell the stories of people who have historically been excluded from spaces like this. And yet, my own daughter is treated as if she doesn't belong." Thornton stared at the floor, His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "This isn't just about today," Dr. Williams continued. "This is about a pattern of behavior that makes certain people feel welcome in these halls, while others are viewed with suspicion." Zora suddenly remembered sitting at their kitchen table when she was 9, asking her mother why there weren't more paintings of people who looked like them in the museum's portrait gallery. "That's why Mommy's job is so important, Sweet Pea," her mother had explained. "We're changing these places from the inside, little by little, day by day." "I want a complete review of our security protocols," Director Harrington said firmly. "And sensitivity training for all staff, starting immediately." "And community outreach programs," Dr. Williams added. "Free art workshops for local schools. Make this museum truly accessible to all children." "Consider it done," Harrington agreed, shooting a stern look at Thornton, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Come, Zora," Dr. Williams said, taking her daughter's hand. "Let's go to my office. I believe you have some sketches to finish." They walked together past the whispers and stares, past Thornton and the security desk, through the Egyptian wing, and toward the administrative offices. Zora held her head high, matching her mother's dignified pace. Dr. Williams's office was a sanctuary of knowledge, walls lined with books on art history and cultural preservation, display cases holding artifacts, being researched, and her degrees from Howard University and Oxford hanging prominently behind her desk. On her bookshelf stood a small wooden sculpture Zora had made in art class last year, placed with the same care as the museum-quality pieces surrounding it. 1 month later, Zora strode through the museum's grand entrance, exchanging warm smiles, with Marco at the security desk. New signs throughout the lobby announced community art programs and cultural education initiatives. A framed code of conduct prominently displayed the museum's commitment to creating a welcoming environment for all visitors. Thornton was nowhere to be seen. Dr. Williams had leveraged the incident into a complete overhaul of the museum's accessibility policies. The board, eager to avoid negative publicity, had approved her proposals with unprecedented speed. Near the West African exhibit, Zora stood before a small group of middle schoolers from her art club, her sketchbook open in her hands. "This mask tells a story about transformation," she explained, pointing to the artifact she'd been drawing the day of the incident. "Just like this museum is transforming." The students leaned in, captivated by her confident voice, echoing through the hall that now truly belonged to everyone.